Hello chess friends and welcome to Tata chess channel and welcome back to the Tata Steel Masters in 2022. So we're now already in the round 5 of the super event and we're following now really beautiful game that was played by Niels Cornelius and Magnus Carlsen. So I'll promise you this one, I'm not going to reveal you who is the winner of this game, but I'm going to promise you in this game you witness the sharpest of all Magnus Carlsen. I think it was really time for Magnus Carlsen to play really an open sharp game, because of course Magnus Carlsen, when he plays solid chess, when he plays his positional chess, then he's basically unbeatable. But if he wants to get his 2900 rating points, as he mentioned that he wants to have this goal, then of course it's really time to also risk something, especially with the black pieces, because many times when you play with the black pieces, of course you just play for a draw and you're satisfied with the draw. But here in this particular game, Magnus Carlsen will attack immediately from the beginning with the black pieces. Really beautiful game it was. Let's see now what happens. So here e4 played by Niels Cornelius. We have c5 by Magnus Carlsen. So far the Sicilian, so it's already a beautiful choice. The Sicilian is of course many times the sharpest opening that you can get. So knight to f3, knight to c6, and after d4, c takes d4, knight to d4, of course we have the open Sicilian. And now after move e6 we have the so-called Taimano variation. The Taimano variation is preparation many times to break here in the position with the move d5. Also with queen to c7 we want to have sort of a setup. Queen to c7, bishop to d6 are opportunities here to build sort of a queen and bishop battery. So after move e6 here, Niels Cornelius played the normal knight to c3. So we have now queen to c7, and if you ask yourself the question, knight to b5 is not such a huge problem, I think, for black, because after queen to b8, bishop to e3, this knight can still be kicked away with a potential a6 move. So okay, you get tempo, but then again with the move a6 white loses another tempo, so it's still playable line of course for white, but it doesn't bring you immediately anything if you play knight to b5. So that's why after move queen to c7, bishop to e3 was played by Niels Cornelius. We have now a6 preventing now finally this move knight to b5. We have now g4, a beautiful move by Niels Cornelius, because he's preparing here immediately a flank attack. In my opinion, the only way to secure the king here for black is of course to maybe even stay with the king in the center or castle king side. So that's why this g4 is not a huge surprise. I think this early flank attack where the king, I think, is supposed to castle is a really beautiful choice here by Niels Cornelius, because if you castle queen side, I think with the weaknesses here on dark squares, it would be a risky idea for Magnus Carlsen. So that's why g4 really makes sense already here by Niels Cornelius. And okay, we have the rule, when you get attacked on the flanks, you have to then strike back in the center. That's one of the basic rules of chess. That's why here I think I can understand now Magnus Carlsen's choice. Knight takes d4. He's I think releasing the pressure a little bit in the center of the board, although you're inviting your opponent's queen into the game, but now at least there is not the tension anymore in the center. That's now the most important thing to recognize. So here b5 by Magnus Carlsen. He's also sensing that Niels Cornelius could of course castle queen side, and if that happens, you want to also be fast on your attack. You want to also have a beautiful counter attack here. So that's why queen side castling. We have now really an opposite side attack game, where black is attacking the queen side and of course white is attacking the king side, and many times it becomes always one of the most beautiful games. So here after move queen side castling, we have bishop to b7 by Magnus. We have f3 fixing of course here the pawn chain, and now we want to make progress further, h4 h5, even g5 and similar ideas. So rook to c8, we have now queen to d2 by Niels Cornelius. We have bishop to b4. Magnus sensed blood immediately, because he's knowing that here the battle could be around the square c3. So that's why Magnus attacked it immediately. What he's trying at least to do is provoke some weaknesses or simplify the game by bishop takes c3. Then after maybe something like queen to c3, queen to c3, you see the battle is simply here around this very important square. So that's why bishop to d4 here by Niels Cornelius, but it's a risky choice also, because this bishop could be kicked away with some f6 e5 ideas, and that's exactly what Magnus Carlsen does. He plays now the move f6. He's preparing e5, and when the bishop gets deflected from the defense, then it's time simply to take out the knight on c3. So that's why here g5 by Niels Cornelius. And now already a critical moment of the game. Here Magnus Carlsen, I think, makes a positional mistake. He plays now the move h6, and h6 is actually not the correct move here. Here actually you should proceed with the move e5, because even if you play something like g takes f6, then knight to f6 is happening, and still this bishop is hanging, so the pawn structure is not messed up here in black position. And even if you retreat here maybe to e3, then you get simply f5. f5 is the move that solves now all of the positional problems, because e takes f5 is not possible because bishop takes f3. So you would be forced here from black perspective to play something like bishop to b6, maybe deflecting the queen here from the d7 square, but it's protectable with queen to c6. You see now this is a line I think that Magnus Carlsen missed, and here I think from this point on black could have really comfortable game, because here after a3, okay, now it's time to take. Bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and now with the move knight to d7, I think everything is glued together here for black. Even castling is now an opportunity. You see the f5 is protected, so okay, maybe you cannot take the c3 pawn immediately because of this one, because of your weak d7 pawn, but as a long-term plan, I think this c3 is the weakness that black can always attack, and I think in the near future with the move d5 black can solve all of the positional problems. So that's why, as we said, after move g5 here, in my opinion, e5 would be really a liberating line for Magnus Carlsen, but he played h6. We have now g takes h6, and now knight to h6 by Neil Grandelis, because Magnus is still preparing the move e5, but it's not so easy to accomplish that, because here White's challenge here, Neil Grandelis immediately challenged Magnus Carlsen bishop on b4 with the move a3, and here we have a beautiful tactic, bishop to a3 here by Magnus Carlsen. We have now b takes a3, and now comes this idea e5. The bishop gets deflected, of course. Oh, sorry, let's go back. Sorry. Here after move, let's see, after move a3, sorry, I messed it up. After move a3, here we have bishop to a3, and now b takes a3, as we said e5, and now knight to b5 here. At least Niels Grandelis is grabbing some further material after a takes b5, now bishop to b2. And okay, let's stop and evaluate the position here by Magnus Carlsen and Niels Grandelis. In my opinion, this is a risky idea here for Magnus, because you see now he had his opportunity to simplify the game now, although there is maybe this beautiful c-file attack here by black, but actually also we can notice the b5 is a little bit weak. Here in the near future we can play rook to g1, attacking the g7. Even if black castles now on the king side, still it would be very risky because of the open g-file. So with the bishop pair on the board here, of course white is slightly better. The only weakness that white is basically is, as I said, the c2 square, which is already attacked, of course, by this rook and queen battery. So here after move bishop to b2, here Magnus pulled off now a really wild move. When you put now this move into an engine, it shows you that it's a huge blunder here by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. d5 is such a risky move, but again, I think I can understand why Magnus did it, because he wanted to keep the pressure in the game. It's, as I said, not the best of moves here. Suddenly the evaluation bar also jumps, so it's really not the best of moves. The best way is simply proceed normally here with the move knight to f7, and then maybe something like h4 could happen, or here even if you try bishop to b5, then still everything is glued together here with the move bishop to c6, then after bishop takes c6, maybe queen to c6. So see, still I think black could have a beautiful attack on the b file, but the cool part about this game, I think, is that you have a beautiful knight here on f7. Then you can, I think, even kingside Carlsen. So as I said, there are many good moves here for black, but d5 was such a risky move here by Magnus Carlsen. And of course Niels Grandelis takes bishop to b5. We have now king to f8, and now bishop to a4. And here Niels Grandelis also made a mistake, because here better idea is simply to play the check. That was now a beautiful opportunity for Niels Grandelis to take over in the game. And now after something like king to g8, now queen to b3, and in a couple more moves we can play after something like knight to to f7. Actually, white can take out the pawn on d5, and the problem is now black has to, I think, played always this kind of a blockade with the move knight to d6, never ever allow this pawn to get advanced, and you can be the judge of this position. In my opinion, here I think already something went wrong for black. So risky choice by Magnus Carlsen, but after move king to f8, here queen to b4 wasn't the move that Niels Cornelius played. He gave now Magnus Carlsen the opportunity with the move bishop to a4, and now Magnus Carlsen can push the pawn on d4, and it's now a different story because now Magnus Carlsen has this advanced pawn on the 4th rank, so we have now a space advantage for black, and it's a huge different story now. In the center of the board, it's now I think even a slightly better position here for black. So because of the c file attack, because of this advanced pawn, and okay, this knight is maybe far away from the action, but the knight will find a way, of course, to get into the game. So here bishop to b3 played by Niels Cornelius. We have knight to f7, so Magnus is trying to get the king, the knight into the game. Queen to b4 is of course still a good check, but it's a little bit too late because Magnus secures now the king on a beautiful square g8, and it's almost like Magnus Carlsen castled because of course, okay, the rook shouldn't be there, but the cool part about this particular scenario is that the rook can come into the game. Here maybe rook to h3, rook to h4, so here the rook is not stuck here. If of course black would have a pawn here on h7, then it would be a weird position because the rook will be simply paralyzed in the corner of the board. But here after move king to g8, you see still this rook has breathing spaces, this rook is still mobile, it's still a good rook of course on the board. So that's why I think I like now more black's position, because something went wrong for Niels Cornelius because he allowed here this e5 move. This e5 move is paralyzing both of these bishops. I think see the bishop on b2 is suddenly not a good piece. So as I said, something went wrong here for Niels. So rook to d2, we have the bishop to a6, we have f4. Here Niels Cornelius is of course trying to, after potential maybe something like e takes f4, then of course the bishop is coming into the game, but of course Magnus doesn't want to play the game like this. He played simply rook to b8, normal idea, attacking here the b file, queen to a4, bishop to b5, queen to b4, and we have now a couple of perpetuals. But now after move queen to b4, here Magnus finally found the best move, rook to h3. Rook to h3 is such a beautiful move because you can guess what's going on now on the board, because here after move bishop to a6, and when the queen somewhere moves, the problem is now this b file attacks. You see rook to b3 would be then an opportunity, and you see now you could maybe recapture with c takes b3 because you are also pinned here on the c file. So there is so much pressure now on the b file, on the c file, by the rook on the b8, by the queen on c7, and also this rook that came into the game through the square h3. So as I said, brutal attack so far by the world champion. So we have f takes e5, f takes e5, we have rook to g1, probably here rook to f2 finally. It's a good choice to finally get this rook into the game. Okay, you're still protecting here your second rank, and okay, maybe after something like rook to b3, queen to b3, you black could maybe play this tactic. It's a risky tactic, but I think it's defendable with queen to a4. And now, okay, black could find a way maybe to include this knight in the game, but I think this position is defendable, although black is slightly better because again of this pressure on the b file, on the c file. So but I wanted to consider always this tactic because, as we said, after rook to f2, rook to b3 is sort of an idea, and then to liberate also here with the move bishop to c4 the b file. So that's why here after move rook to g1, here Magnus played a different idea. He played bishop to e2, opening up again the b file. Now you have to move the queen. We have bishop to f7, intermediate check by Niels Cornelius. You have to do that because if you move the queen somewhere, then of course we have here the opportunity to take rook takes b3 or rook from a to b3. So then of course you cannot recapture with the pawn. You would be forced to sacrifice your queen for the rook. So that's why here you have to take bishop to f7 first. We have king to f7, now queen to a4, and now queen to b7. Here Niels Cornelius hopes for a draw. Of course he played now queen to b4 after potential queen to b4, a takes b4, rook to b4. This should be probably sorry, it doesn't work, of course, for Magnus Carlsen, because the bishop is hanging. But imagine a position where maybe the bishop is somewhere here on a6. If the bishop wouldn't be loose on the board, then of course this would be probably a drawish endgame because of this opposite colored bishop. So it's sort of a position that no one wants to get, I think, now. So here, queen to b4, Magnus Carlsen realized that he could still make some kind of a progress, so that's why he didn't want to trade off the queens. Played queen to c7, queen to a4, bishop to b5, and now after rook to h7, here this was also now a critical moment of the game. Instead of this move bishop to b5, here Magnus Carlsen, I think, should have played bishop to c4. This move bishop to c4 is so important because you're not vulnerable to this attack by the queen on b3. And now, for instance, if white plays something like rook from h to g2, rook from d to g2, pardon me, then of course rook to h7 has to be played. But now you see here the queen to b3 move is not the possibility. So it's a huge difference, because Magnus Carlsen, after move queen to a4, played bishop to b5, but now Niels Grandelius found a beautiful counterattack, rook to g2, and you see now after this scenario that Magnus Carlsen played rook to h7. Now this move queen to b3 is possible, but now after bishop to c4, here you see Magnus Carlsen allowed here Niels Grandelius to build this very, very powerful battery on the g file, and suddenly it's again a drawish position, because Magnus Carlsen tried to counterattack queen to b6 here, but Niels Grandelius of course simplified the game with queen to g6. We have queen takes g6, rook to g6, and now rook to c8. Again, Magnus is trying now to keep his pressure on the c file. Of course, you can play something like king to b1, and I think again this should be probably a draw. But you know, Magnus Carlsen's endgames are always something special, because now Niels Grandelius made a huge mistake. Again, he allowed here Magnus Carlsen to take over because he played rook to g5, and the problem is now bishop to d3 is happening, and the problem is now there is not a good way anymore to defend this position. If you take, of course, then you lose simply this pawn. So here, after move bishop to d3, it's already a critical game for Niels Grandelius. As I said, king to b1 would be perfectly fine. Every other move is perfectly fine, but here you should protect simply your c2 weakness. Then of course you have, I think, a drawish position. So again, Magnus Carlsen had the opportunity to take over, and after bishop to d3, we have now many defensive opportunities. You can even play c3, maybe to sacrifice the pawn just in order to simplify the game. But okay, here, as I said, it was really unnecessary for Niels Grandelius to do that. So after bishop to d3, Niels Grandelius played rook to f5, and Magnus retreated to g8. But still, the c2 pawn is hanging. The only way, of course, to defend it is by placing your rook on the second rank. Very messed up position now for black. So black is, pardon me, for white. White is basically trying here to get a draw. And here, after rook to f2, Magnus Carlsen played rook to h6. Finally, he can include also this other rook into the game, because there is no pressure anymore on the g file. So that's why it's time now to again include all our pieces into the game. So it's now not so easy even for, of course, to win the game for black, but Niels Grandelius played this couple inaccuracies and plays now rook to d1, attacks simply the bishop, and now again a new critical moment of the game. Here Magnus Carlsen played a slightly inaccurate move, which actually could be better because here he took immediately bishop to e4. A better idea is to play rook to f6. Rook to f6 would actually deflect this rook from the square c2, and if you play rook to f6, then this pawn is again connected to this pawn chain. So let's see, if you play rook to f6, then we have first this intermediate check, rook takes c2, you have to escape with your king, and now with the move rook to d2, we can also play, of course, something like king to c1, then takes, and now after this one, I think this should be a winning game for black, because first of all, what you can do is, of course, take out this pawn, and then we have here three connected pawns in the center. What you could do, maybe instead of this idea, you could play rook to d2 in order to defend here a second rank, but now it's time to play bishop to e4, and it's now a different story, because still Niels Grandelius has some problems here around the square c2, and this d3 for this e4 pawn could be marching, and then e3 could happen. So even if you play again rook takes f6, then g takes f6 is simply improving black's pawn structure. So as I said, here after move rook to d1, Magnus Carlsen should have played rook to f6, and this was the only way to win the game. And I really don't want to criticize Magnus Carlsen. This is really top engine move. I'm not sure if I wouldn't even consider the move, but this was, as I said, simply the suggested move in order to win the game. Here Magnus was a little bit greedy, took the bishop immediately, but it allows now here Niels Grandelis, of course, to attack and also to play an attack against this backward pawn on e5. So here rook to h4, you see the pieces are not active again, and here a4 was played by Niels Grandelis, and now rook to c5 by Magnus. Again, maybe slightly more accurate is rook to c4. Then white needs to make progress with the pawn, and now again this idea could work with the move d3. Again, this was the only way maybe to spice up the game, but I think still again that this game should end in a draw, because the pawns are not connected anymore here of Magnus Carlsen. So it's probably again drawish game. So the only way was this idea to play, as we said, let's go back to play the move rook to f6. Okay, but here after move rook to c5, here Niels Grandelis attacked the rook. We have rook to c8, bishop to e7. Here Niels Grandelis of course includes this bishop into the game. Rook to g4, h3, rook to g2, and now a simplification: rook takes g2, bishop to g2, rook takes e5. We have now this idea, d3, the last try here by Magnus Carlsen to spice up the game somehow, but here bishop to c5 cuts off, of course, the connection on the c file. Here we have rook to a8, c takes d3, rook takes a4, and both players in this position agreed to a draw. So here I think a couple more moves were played here in the continuation. Niels Grandelis, I think, played a couple more, but after move or two, both players, I think, agreed to a draw. So this is, of course, drawish. Of course, Magnus Carlsen can take out this one, can also maybe attack this one, but opposite colored bishops are, of course, draw positions. So really wild game. I'm not sure what to say. The Magnus Carlsen pulled off really a wild move in this early stage of the game with the move d5, opened the position, played risky chess, didn't get rewarded because he played a couple inaccuracies. You see also Niels Grandelis almost lost drawish endgame. So it's really wild how chess is working. Sometimes you win some games which you should not, sometimes you not winning some games that you should win, sometimes you make a draw where you should win. So I don't know, really many things can happen to you. See, even in top grandmasters level, inaccuracies, mistakes and blunders happen for sure. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Again, only a draw for Magnus Carlsen, which is, of course, not that we want to disrespect Niels Grandelis, but if Magnus Carlsen wants now to get his goal, his 2900 rating points, he has to win some games, he has to make some rating points, because every time when Magnus Carlsen is making a draw, he's basically losing 2-3 rating points. So it's simply not working so far for the world champion Magnus. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more games from this event, check out my coverage so far. Here are some games that we have analyzed before, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chats is the best, of course.